There's a race on right now between China and the United States. And China is way out in front. You can't really hear it. It involves electric vehicles and they don't make a lot of sounds. But it is being felt in all sorts of different ways, raising questions about protectionism, competition, and all manners of innovation.
There was a car that was showed off that had a system for cooking Chinese hot pot in the car.
And who gets left behind?
There is a real risk, I think, for U.S. automakers that over time the U.S. market becomes kind of like the Cuban car market, cut off from the rest of the world.
So let's dive in to the upheaval in the global car market. This is Reuters Econ World. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins, in Dublin. So to really get under the hood, as it were, of the global car sector, I called up two people steeped in the industry. Kevin Krolicki is a pod favourite. He's Reuters Greater China bureau chief and a Detroit native who's covered the car industry for decades. Brian Thevenot is Reuters Global Autos editor, leading our coverage of the sector around the world. Welcome to Reuters Econ World, Brian and Kevin. Kevin, of course, you're a regular guest on the show, dialing in from Beijing, and Brian dialing in from that well-known auto centre, New Orleans. Hey, guys.
Morning.
Hey, Carmel.
Morning, evening.
Thanks for having us.
You're so welcome. So, Kevin, if I could start with you. So you've been covering the auto sector for decades, like in the US and Japan, China, this industry globally, in a bit of a state of flux, right? Like how would you describe the state it is in right now?
Well, in China, I think we're at a bit of an inflection point. There has been a long-running discussion about China's overcapacity, and that overcapacity, the ability to produce way more vehicles than China's market can absorb, is a product of past subsidy policies at the national level and local government level. So there is a sense here, and you can see it in official communication from the government too, that in some instances the subsidies have been abused. The subsidies have kind of gone off the rails and created unintended consequences. And China is both at a moment of kind of maximum manufacturing strength and vulnerability too, because there's a sense that a reckoning is coming here. Earlier this month, Alex Partners, consultancies, released a forecast. Their view is that only 15 of the 129 automotive brands, and to say that there are 129 automotive brands here is itself kind of a staggering thing.
Yeah.
But only 15 by 2030 will be viable.
Wow. That's the auto industry's version of the Hunger Games. Brian, from outside of China, the auto industry elsewhere, how would you describe the situation it's in at the moment?
I mean, it's a hot mess.
Okay, right.
It's a really, it's one of the world's toughest businesses to make any money in right now, I think. It's incredibly capital intensive. It's incredibly challenging to figure out what to invest in. And it's in the midst of a once-in-a-century technological upheaval.
Is that all because of China?
It's partially driven by China. It's not all because of China. I mean,
okay.
Tesla was really the first company that sort of proved the concept of the, mass-produced, mass-market electric car.
Yeah.
China very quickly caught up to what Tesla was doing and sort of proved the concept of the mass-market affordable electric car, which is key to their success.
Yeah.
They have also, this is something we explored in a recent Reuters special report, they have greatly accelerated their development and manufacturing, especially of electric cars, but of all cars. They've essentially cut the time it takes to develop a brand new model or a completely redesigned existing model from about 5 years to less than 2 years.
Right.
That's an extraordinary advantage. It's an extraordinary manufacturing achievement, technological achievement.
Yeah.
It's partially due to the subsidies, the government subsidies that you hear a lot about in China, but not completely. There's real innovation there. And I think the biggest difference, it's maybe not every customer needs a brand new car every 2 years, although the China customer is becoming accustomed to this and starting to expect it. But it cuts so much cost out of the process, right? If you're using AI to speed things up, if you're learning ways to cut corners without compromising safety, if you're paying engineers to work fewer hours on every single model, you're going to cut a ton of cost out of bringing a car to market. And so that is really proving to be a hugely disruptive force.
Yeah, I think that the headline of that story was China's auto giants are leaving like GM, Volkswagen, and Tesla for dust. I mean, the stats in it were incredible.
Yeah, the one that really jumped out at me was we took a look at BYD and the speed of its model releases and compared it to Tesla.
Yeah.
Tesla's had about 6 models in its entire history, and I don't think it's ever fully redesigned any of those cars. Those are groundbreaking EVs, but since 2020, when Tesla put out its best-selling Model Y, BYD has rolled out more than 40 all-new vehicles and 139 updated or refreshed models that just milder redesigns. So that tells you the speed at which the biggest, most successful Chinese companies are working, and it's leaving the legacy automakers gasping for breath.
And if you want to hear more on how Chinese automakers are overtaking the competition, we'll put a link to that special report in the description to today's show. You can also find it on the Reuters app. Go to Menu and click on the Investigations tab. So, Brian, there are certain things that the Chinese automakers just do like super fast. Are we're calling them the legacy automakers. They must hate that phrase. How are they trying to deal with this challenge? What's their strategy?
Well, some of them are actively seeking partnerships with Chinese automakers to better learn what they do.
Right.
Stellantis, the maker of Jeep and Ram trucks and a bunch of European brands, is one example of that. And they have a tie-up with Leap Motor to produce EVs. And VW, the world's second biggest automaker, has a partnership with XPeng, a Chinese startup. It has some very promising technology to try to accelerate and improve their production of electric vehicles.
So now the auto industry is, one of the reasons why it's so important to the global economy is it drives innovation with its R&D. So if you can't compete with Chinese automakers on price or on speed, what about innovation? Like, who's doing that better? Are there some standout players?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on that, which is, the government policy and the subsidies for the market, the EV market here, have created this situation in which, as Brian said, there's real innovation. And some of the real innovation, it actually now makes the problem of overcapacity worse.
Right.
So, for example, Brian talked about the development times and how Chinese automakers and suppliers have managed to just compress that to the point where the auto industry is almost becoming like fast fashion.
Yeah.
It's turning that quickly. And what that has done, if you look at both the automakers themselves and some of their key suppliers, there's an industry now that can, from start to finish, basically design, build, and sell you, if you wanted to make one, like a white label EV.
Right. So
that brings down the barrier to entry. Anybody could be an EV maker now if you want to partner with one of these Chinese companies. And then, at the margin, it's allowed companies to experiment with and try to develop models that the rest of the world has decided are too costly or inefficient. So, for example, NIO, which is it's an EV maker here, that's never been profitable. Brian and I were talking about this recently. NIO is still pushing ahead with battery swap. And you can pull your NIO into a swap station in China and roll out 3 minutes later, fully charged with a brand new battery. So there's a dynamic here in which the innovation, in some instances, is both providing additional choice for consumers, probably driving further innovation, but in terms of overcapacity, also arguably making the problem worse.
Right. There's few winners.
There's legacy automakers shouldn't be counted out. You've got, I would say Toyota looks the strongest of the big brand names that we all, have known for decades. Their sales are down in China. Their share is down in China, but it's not drastically down like you've seen with some other companies, particularly GM and its partnership with SAIC has lost a ton of sales really fast. Toyota has also avoided investing too much in EVs and played to its strength in hybrids, which has initially brought the company tons of criticism, but has turned out to be a very smart financial move. And they're riding a wave of hybrids, and they have deep expertise in making hybrid cars that don't have to be charged at all. They make plug-in hybrids as well, but they're very good at making a car that just gets 30%, 35% better gas mileage than a gasoline car. And in most of the world, gasoline cars and hybrids are still by far the dominant technology, and they're going to be for many years. There's been a lot of talk in the auto industry about a tipping point where EVs will suddenly accelerate to become most of the market or even all of the market, but I think that's still very much in doubt.
Right.
And even in China, where EVs have grown so fast, pure EVs, pure battery-powered EVs are still only 25, 30-ish%, and they have a huge sector in hybrids and plug-in hybrids.
And of course, with President Trump, getting rid of the EV subsidies in his big, beautiful bill, presumably that's also slowing the pace of EV adoption in the US.
Absolutely. EV adoption's been flat for the last, I would say, year and a half after, there was a lot of excitement about EV growth, maybe all the way through about halfway through 2023 or so. And then you saw a real flattening in 2024 and continued in 2025. And we're about to see, I would say, most analysts and investors would predict a decline in EV adoption from here because Trump just took away a $7,500 per car tax credit.
Yeah.
That's a big, big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Most automakers who are producing EVs, Tesla aside, were already not making a profit on them. They were investing in hopes of future profits. Now you're going to have $7,500 less profit. You're either going to have to eat that cost yourself to keep moving those cars, or you're just going to have to sell fewer EVs. And I think that's what we're going to see. I mean, recently we saw GM making a gigantic investment in factories that make very large trucks, which is their specialty, and they're dominant in that sector, and they make tons of money at it. They're quite good at it, but it's going to set back GM's EV transition. And GM has been one of the most aggressive US automakers for the last 10 or 15 years in trying to push forward an EV transition. And they just were on the cusp, I think, of getting some real traction when these EV subsidies were pulled out from under them.
If you're interested in hearing more about what's going on in the car sector, subscribe to the Reuters AutoFile newsletter. We'll put a link in the description to today's show. Or you can subscribe on the Reuters app. Go to the menu and click on Newsletters. And while I have you, thank you so much for all the nice comments on last week's longer show. As you can tell, we're doing it again this week, so let me know what you think, either in the comments section of your favourite podcast platform or ping me on LinkedIn. So, maybe a question for both of you then. Is Trump good or bad news for the US auto sector, right? Because he is obviously protecting it from the Chinese, right, with these huge tariffs. But he's also, the removal of the EV subsidies does slow that adoption.
So even before Trump and the Biden administration, they passed very high tariffs and other trade barriers against Chinese cars specifically.
Yep.
That is giving U.S. automakers and other automakers selling cars in the U.S. a lot of breathing room, to keep selling cars without having to compete with potentially really fierce competitors from China.
Yeah.
However, Chinese car companies are rapidly expanding exports across the world. So you have a situation where the United States is becoming a walled-off market.
Yeah.
If you're not competing with the best automakers in the world and you're only trying to sell cars in the United States, then obviously you're not going to be as sharp when you try to export to other countries. If you want to go and sell EVs in Brazil, for instance, the biggest market in Latin America, you're going to run smack into BYD as soon as you get there. And, BYD is dropping just massive tankers full of cars, many football fields full of cars into Brazil as fast as they can. So it's only temporary protection. The tariffs, and there are other trade barriers that, for instance, prevent Chinese connected car technology from being used in the United States for national security reasons. So this was all in effect before Trump.
Yeah.
Trump obviously has embraced that same philosophy, and then added taking away the EV subsidies that were propping up, the only thing that were giving U.S. automakers and other automakers selling cars in the U.S. a shot at making a profit on EVs. And I think The US, the percentage of all cars sold in the US that are EVs is now at about 7. It could slowly drop from there.
Yeah.
Tesla is losing sales quite fast for a variety of reasons. Its model lineup is getting old. Its CEO is alienating many of Tesla's historically liberal core customers who bought into the notion of EVs that Elon Musk originally sold them, was we're selling EVs to save the world and fight climate change. Well, his politics have done a 180 from that.
Yeah. He's become a bumper sticker.
Yeah, I mean, on the question of how these policies, these protectionist policies, reshape things and whether they're good or bad. Yeah, I mean, maybe in the short term, exactly as Brian said, they provide breathing room. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find an example in economic history where protectionism allowed an industry to successfully regroup
Yeah.
and then better compete globally.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the barrier for China's global expansion is political. It's, it's tariffs in the EU. It's basically the bar to entry in the US market. But the innovation here is real. And overcapacity is an issue that China has to deal with. But there is a real risk, I think, for US automakers that over time, the US market becomes kind of Galapagos, in like evolutionary history, or becomes kind of like the Cuban car market, cut off from the rest of the world. That's a competitive threat to the industry over time.
Yeah.
I love that Galapagos reference. A colleague of mine recently called it Dinosaur Island, that we're potentially looking at a market where internal combustion engine, very large vehicles that can't be sold anywhere else in the world become the only thing that the US car companies are able to compete at. And I think the US car companies, in their defense, have made huge investments and tried quite hard to move into what a lot of their executives have called the electric future.
Mm-hmm.
But they also are, the US market is not just walled off from a consumer perspective, but the car companies that are trying to make EVs here are walled off from Chinese supply chains because of trade barriers. And that's, there's no one in the car industry would argue that China doesn't have the best battery supply chain in the world. If you're trying to get batteries and battery minerals from anywhere else but China, you're going to have a tough time of it. China controls 90% of the world's battery minerals refining capacity, I believe. Kevin, is that right?
It's absolutely dominant, and you can't build an EV without a battery. I mean, it's sort of, Brian's right. If you look at GM and look at all of the attempts to develop an EV, going all the way back to the EV1, I think that's 25 years ago.
1997.
Yeah, and then after that, when they're in trouble and they're taking the TARP money with the Obama administration, starting to provide subsidies for a battery industry. They're developing the Cruise, which is going to be a plug-in hybrid. That's going to change everything. To today, and they've been at it for a long time. They've got smart engineers. They just don't have the supply chain and the price advantage that China provides.
I mean, Brian, you mentioned there, auto executives talking about the electric future, but it sort of feels like that is the present in China. Like, when Tesla recently rolled out its robo-taxi launch in Texas, actually, I think I pinged you, Kevin, and I said, is anyone paying attention to this in China? Because, of course, robo-taxis are a thing in lots of cities already. And I think you said, no, it had barely made a ripple.
People talk about all kinds of things, but the robotaxi rollout was not kind of a water cooler moment in China. There are something like, I think, 20 cities now where we have autonomous vehicle testing in China. It's been going on for a long time. The big debate here, it's not over the technology and the kind of gee whiz, there's a car on Congress in Austin that's driving itself. It's more, this is so real, what's going to happen to the jobs? Because the gig economy and the future of those drivers, the economic future of those drivers, that's a real concern in China. And so I think the debate here is over not whether this can be done, but how to manage it in a way that doesn't, kill all of the jobs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're living in China. Are there innovations that are there now that would be kind of surprising to a US audience? When you go home, you go back home to the US, I mean, do you sort of tell people, like, what's the sort of, I don't know, what's the innovation there that's a real standout for you?
There are lots of examples.
Yeah.
But just to go back to NIO, I mean, these are a couple. So NIO has a feature, and these are, in the China market, luxury EVs, but you can personalize and digitally control in-vehicle scent, I guess.
What, the smell inside your car?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have fragrance systems.
So, but they don't have those little Christmas trees hanging in the front of the car, no?
No.
But those pungent car.
Not a cutout cardboard pine tree.
Yeah, exactly.
But a whole digital system that's helping you refine what your car smells like.
What are the scents? What are the smells? Are we talking like lavender,
Actually, so I have to say, I mean, I saw the technology on display. I have not been in a car and, tried to fine tune pine scent. But, that's one. And then they also, on the high end vehicles, they have lots of Chinese EVs and Tesla pioneered this, but they're giant screens.
Yeah.
In the front console, the passengers have screens.
Yeah.
The expectation is you're going to be watching something or maybe working when you're charging. NIO has a feature on one of its high-end vehicles that allows you to watch a movie and the vehicle will respond to what's happening on screen. So if there's an earthquake on screen, the car will shake.
No, seriously?
The car will shake. Yeah.
What if you're watching some sort of horror movie, like a zombie flick or something? That's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean,
how deep does this go?
I thought it was cool, but I have like a 8-year-old sense of what's cool.
No one wants to feel an earthquake when they're in the car. No one wants to feel that. That's
Kevin. You remember at this year's auto show, and I'm sorry, I forget which automaker it was. There was a car that was showed off that had a system for cooking Chinese hot pot in the car.
Wow.
Yeah, you kind of on a tailgate.
My mind is blown.
I don't know. Is that a meaningful competitive advantage over the long term? I don't know, but yeah.
I don't know. I have teenagers. If you can, make your pot noodle in the backseat and everyone's got a screen, that sounds like everyone's happy, to be perfectly honest with you. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm their target market. Being able to cook a hot pot might not be what you're looking for from a car, but what sort of innovations would you like to see? Let me know in the comments section of your preferred podcast platform or on LinkedIn. We talked about Trump, we talked about the US and its tariffs. They're not the only country doing that, right? We've also have Europe putting up barriers for Chinese vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they are innovating to a wonderful degree, if they can't actually sell their products, that's not good for their bottom line. That's not good for the Chinese economy, right?
Europe is actually taking a much more accommodating stance in trade policy towards China.
Well, I think we're stuck in the middle, Brian, both geographically and also just geopolitically.
Yeah.
Right? There's between DC and Beijing.
Well, absolutely. And they're part of the reason they've taken a more accommodating stance, and they've passed tariffs, but they're much lower tariffs. They're, in the US, the tariffs on Chinese cars are an effective ban.
Right. You don't see Chinese cars on the streets of Detroit, New Orleans. There are none. There are no Chinese cars here. There are some Chinese-made cars here, very few, and they're from American or European brands like GM or Volvo. Yeah. There are no Chinese brand cars in the United States. They're essentially banned by both super high tariffs and other trade barriers over national security concerns. You see them in Europe. Europe is taking a much different stance. They've passed tariffs to level the playing field, but they want a playing field. They realize Chinese cars are coming. Many countries are actively seeking, even subsidizing Chinese car factories. Yeah. They want the jobs. They don't want the cars just coming off the boats. They want Chinese car makers to go ahead and invest, to put up dealerships and factories, to create jobs. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of the European automakers, particularly the German automakers, are hugely dependent on the China car market. VW, until very recently, was the largest automaker in China. It lost that crown to BYD, the largest EV maker and EV and hybrid maker in China, not surprisingly. Mm-hmm. But it still has a massive amount of it, maybe a third of its sales in China. So they can't afford just to lock the Chinese cars out. Right. They're trying to come with an accommodating stance that gets consumers cars that they want to buy and gets Chinese companies to invest in Europe. And also the reality is that while Chinese car makers have cut tons of costs,
out of the process of making a car, they are not selling their cars for dirt cheap in Europe. They're selling them for prices comparable to comparable European models. They're not taking a strategy that we're just going to undercut everybody and take market share. You could argue that they've done that in China, and they've taken huge amounts of market shares from foreign automakers operating in China over the past 5 years. I mean, the foreign automakers have gone from something like controlling 2/3 of the market to controlling 1/3 of the market in a very, very short time in China, which is the world's largest car market. I think the strategy now seems to be Chinese car makers, because of the price war there and because of the intense, to some degree, artificially intense competition among so many players in China, they can't make any money there, so they're trying to make all their profits on overseas exports. So you'll see a car that sells for $15,000 in China, for instance, it might sell for $32,000 in Europe.
Right.
So, I mean, it's interesting. China's approach to the EU is very different, as Brian said. I mean, from the start, after some initial indignation over the EU's finding that exports were being unfairly subsidized, from the start, rather, the Chinese approach was, let's make a deal.
Right.
And they're talking about some kind of minimum price guarantee, a price, so-called price undertaking. It's very much like what the Japanese auto industry did in the 1980s, in the Reagan years, where they negotiated these, at that time, it was voluntary export restrictions, followed by a wave of investment in the U.S. Toyota and Honda, led that investment then. So that's where China would like to move those discussions. And then that involves and could produce a really important pressure valve for the Chinese industry. Minimum, and if it's minimum and competitive pricing in Europe, that's a good thing for Chinese automakers who really struggle to turn a profit on vehicle sales here.
But, in terms of the pressures they're under to get those sales up, I mean, there's some things going on that are kind of like eyebrow raising, to say the least, right?
There's definitely some sales inflation going on there. However, I think that is, Kevin, I'd love to hear your view. I think that is mostly on the margins.
I mean, if I could walk over to the window, the streets are packed. The cars, millions more, tens of millions more are out there than were if we go back in time. So the ghost fleet, the sort of subsidy-driven game playing is important at the margin, but it's also, I think it's important to say it's gotten increasing notice within China.
Right.
Yeah.
And you see some backlash now, and the government has come out to say, to audit subsidies that some of the automakers have taken, to look at cases where they've been improperly given subsidies on the consumer side. And it's part of a bigger discussion here about how to restructure the economy. And for years, U.S. officials, and if you think just back a couple of years ago, Janet Yellen was here making this point very forcefully, had been telling China, overcapacity is not just a problem for us, it's a problem for you too.
Yeah.
It's a vulnerability in your economy. And I think the official rhetoric here is shifting in a way that suggests that view is taking hold.
Yeah.
There's discussion about how to rebalance demand here, how to shift more toward consumption and away from this over-reliance on manufacturing and exports. And that's happening at the same time that you're seeing a backlash against some of the apparent subsidy abuse by Chinese automakers and dealers and brokers.
Is Beijing trying to manage the evolution of the car industry in China? Are they trying to sort of manage the sort of what seems like an inevitable shakeout downsizing so that they don't so it doesn't sort of get out of control?
Yeah.
Because I know we had, I think it was the chairman of the Great Wall Motor Company, sort of drawing parallels with Evergrande, what's going on in the car industry in China. He drew parallels with Evergrande, which was obviously this big property developer that went belly up, huge ramifications for the Chinese economy. So is Beijing trying to, what is it, soft landing, whatever that phrase?
Manage a soft landing?
Manage a soft landing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I think this is a point that's not always well appreciated, but there's not just one government in China. There are many governments, and the national government sets strategic direction, and then it's up to the local governments to implement and to experiment with the policy. Clearly, the important consideration here is it's always social stability, and that's linked to jobs. And so there is a recognition that, as the industry ministry said recently, that subsidy dependence is a risk. But at the same time, I think if you go back over the last couple of years, we've only had, and I think there are 129 brands here, but we've only had 2 marginal players file for bankruptcy. It's been very, very slow.
Right.
And there is a reluctance by the local governments
Mm-hmm.
to kind of give up on their EV bets and the companies that they've subsidized.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a concern, an evident concern at the national level about how all of this affects jobs and household incomes.
That's the key argument by some Western officials and Western automakers, is that you've got an unsustainable market with a bunch of car companies that would likely fail if they were not in China, but they're not being allowed to fail. And that's making it hard for everyone else to compete because it's driving prices down to a level where no one can make a profit.
But what's changed now, I think, is that the U.S. is not in a position to lecture anybody about free market economics in the auto industry. I mean, I don't know, maybe there was some perceived moral high ground in those arguments before, but China's going to address this in the way that China sees best for China. And I think there's sort of increasing scorn for, I guess, U.S. lecturing on these principles. I mean, given the tariffs and other interventions that we've talked about from the U.S. side.
Speaking of free market economics, you don't just have to listen to me. I also have a weekly newsletter where I spotlight a major economic theme and showcase the best of Reuters macroeconomic coverage. You can sign up on the Reuters app. Just go to the newsletters tab in the menu. Up next, the future of the car industry in China and Elon Musk's challenge. So where does this leave us then? At the start, Kevin, you mentioned that the Chinese market's at an inflection point, but it sounds like it's a very slow-moving inflection point. There's not going to be some sort of rapid realignment. And then, Brian, you said from the kind of outside China, it's a hot mess. So where does that leave us?
I think there will be a reckoning in China, but I doubt it will be one explosive event. I'd really love to hear Kevin's take on this, being there in Beijing, but I think you hit it on the head, Carmel, that the Chinese government is going to try to manage this down, right? They're going to try to let some automakers fail that need to fail. They might try to get some automakers to swallow other automakers and have a managed consolidation of the industry. There's no doubt that there's too many players and prices have gone too low for anyone to make a profit. I don't see one cataclysmic event coming out of this in China. What do you think, Kevin?
No, I think that's right. So if you look at, we're talking about the auto industry, but China has a similar overcapacity problem in a number of industries. Solar panels is one. You're seeing the start of a discussion about consolidation and some official sort of intervention there to guide toward what I'm certain they hope would be some version of a soft landing. It's true in the housing market. The biggest drag on China's economy right now is the property sector. That is an overcapacity problem too, where incentives over years created an oversupply, in 2020, 2021, when policy changed, the government became concerned about the buildup of a bubble. All of that went into reverse. That's the trigger for the Evergrande failure that you mentioned. And so when auto executives here are referencing Evergrande, people here understand they're talking about another overcapacity problem.
Yeah.
And I think China tends to think about these things in the very long term, 5-year plans in terms of how local policy gets set and implemented. And so when they talk about a shift towards consumption, the officials and advisors and academics that our reporters have spoken to are expecting them to be thinking out 5, 10, and 15 years. And I think that's the time frame over which they'll want to try to steer this too. So I would think it's unlikely that you get some kind of a tectonic shift unless there's some sort of exogenous demand shock or something else.
Right. Okay, so China has the long-term view. For Tesla, Brian, we're kind of looking at things from quarter to quarter. Its sales are dropping. Can Elon Musk manage to get Tesla out of this?
Boy, if I could answer that question, I'd make a lot of money. Tesla faces some serious threats. Tesla has a well-deserved reputation for being not only a US EV pioneer, but the world's EV pioneer. It actually has a great brand and reputation still in China, but it's losing sales all over the world. And one of the biggest challenges it faces is its own stock price, right? Its stock price trades at like a PE ratio of like 175, where GM stock price trades at like 5, right? VW trades at 5. Even BYD's stock price, it's, the biggest, fastest growing China EV competitor, is much lower than Tesla's relative to its own sales fundamentals, right? So you've got a situation where Tesla's fundamentals in sales and profit are dropping fast, and the market is continuing to bet on Tesla's future for products that are not here yet.
In other words, Tesla's share price is still really expensive. It's an expensive stock despite everything that's happened.
Really, really high.
Right.
And despite everything that's happened, despite the political controversy swirling around Elon Musk, there is an unshakable faith in Tesla's future on Wall Street.
Right.
And so at some point, Tesla is going to have to deliver robotaxis and robots, not only to deliver them, but to deliver them at incredible levels of revenue and profit. When exactly the market's faith runs out or it gets tired of waiting is anybody's guess. But that's the valley that they're trying to get over, is they have to take a declining car business and turn it into an AI business that has, robotaxis and robots and other groundbreaking futuristic products. So it basically has to do what it did for EVs all over again in a new industry.
So for them, the tipping point is either the true believers suddenly lose faith or Tesla manages to do it.
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
Right. It's the biggest question hanging over the auto industry right now, I would say.
It's hard to see how they do it without China, let us say Tesla. And it's a much tougher market for them here. The non-Tesla local players have something like 2/3 now of the share of plug-in hybrids and pure EVs. Tesla still has a kind of a halo here, but it hasn't gotten licensing to roll out what they call the full self-driving technology in China. Lots of Chinese automakers have what they say are systems that are as good or better coming. And Musk's, Brian referenced the shifting perception of Musk, and that's a factor as well. I think early on, before Trump took office, there was an attempt to reach out to Musk as a kind of intermediary. Clearly, that's not a live channel of communication anymore. So, all of that put together, plus the incessant competition and the lack of really, Tesla doesn't advertise traditionally, and you see that here. So that Musk himself still has a star quality here. The brand still has a halo, but it's an increasingly tough market for them.
Brian, Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Brian and Kevin for their time and insights, particularly the vignettes of the in-car sense. I'll never look at a cardboard pine cone air freshener in the same way again. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, please drop us a line in the comments section of your favourite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Sound design, music composition and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vanell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Christopher Wall-Jasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Bilka Labaran and Sharon Reich-Garson. Our executive producer is Leila de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.